My grandfather signed a new will on a Tuesday in October. I found out on a Wednesday in April, 6 months after he was buried, when a paralegal named Donna Schubert called me at 7:14 in the morning and read me a number. The number was 0. My name had been removed from the document 14 months before he died. I was not told. My grandfather did not tell me. My parents did not tell me. The attorney did not tell me. I found out the way you find out, when no one planned for you to find out at all, from a paralegal who assumed I already knew. I did not already know. I have never cried on a phone call before, or since. Donna Schubert stayed on the line for 11 minutes after she finished reading. She did not say anything. She just stayed. That was the kindest thing anyone did for me in the entire year that followed. My name is Renata Osei. I grew up in Akron, Ohio, in a brick colonial on Merriman Road, 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard with a sugar maple that my grandfather had planted the year my mother was born. My grandfather, Edwin Osei, had come from Kumasi, Ghana, in 1967, with a mechanical engineering degree from Kwame Nkrumah's University of Science and Technology, and $40 in his wallet. He told me both of those numbers so many times that I cannot hear the number 40 without seeing him. He built a small machine shop in Cuyahoga Falls that employed 23 people by the time I was born. He retired in 2004. He kept his tools in a pegboard cabinet in the garage of the Merriman Roadhouse, every outline painted in orange so you could see the empty space where something was missing. The tradition in the Osei family was not spoken. It did not need to be. It existed the way furniture exists. You navigate around it without deciding to. The eldest grandchild, which was me, was the one who spent Saturdays with Edwin, the one who learned to read a torque wrench and a tax return and a blueprint in the same year. The one who sat at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings while Edwin walked through the shop ledgers with a no. 2 pencil marking in the margins, explaining what the numbers meant and why they moved the way they moved. My cousin Darnell was the eldest grandchild on my father's side. He was 3 months younger than me. He had never been invited to the ledger table. That was not cruelty. That was simply how it had always been arranged. I was Edwin's first grandchild. I was the one who sat beside him. I had assumed, without ever confirming, that the arrangement meant something permanent. I graduated from Ohio State in 2011 with a degree in civil engineering. Edwin drove himself to Columbus for the ceremony in his 1998 Ford F-250, the same truck he had driven since before I could remember. And he sat in the third row of the outdoor seating with a paper program folded in his breast pocket. After the ceremony he shook my hand, the way he shook everyone's hand. Full grip, 2 pumps. Held an extra second and he said, "Good work, Renata." 3 words. Edwin was not a man who used more words than a thing required. I took a job at a structural engineering firm called Hargrove Associates in Cleveland in the fall of 2011. The commute from Akron was 41 minutes on the I-77. I drove it both directions 5 days a week and I did not mind it, because on Sunday mornings I still drove the 11 minutes to Merriman Road and sat at the kitchen table with Edwin in the ledger. By 2014, the machine shop had been sold, but Edwin kept the ledger habit. He tracked his investments the same way he had tracked the shop pencil margins, numbered columns, annotated by quarter. He had done well. He did not tell me the total. I did not ask. You do not ask Edwin Osei what something is worth. My parents, Comfort and Gerald Osei, lived 4 miles from Merriman Road, in a newer house in Fairlawn that they had bought in 2009. My father worked in hospital administration at Summa Health. My mother taught 3rd grade at Firestone Par, K Elementary for 22 years. They were not extravagant people. They drove sensible cars and took 1 vacation a year, usually to Charleston or Savannah, and they had a subscription to the Beacon Journal that arrived on the porch every morning, in a blue sleeve. I tell you all of this because I want you to understand that what happened was not the result of desperate people. It was the result of a decision that comfortable people make when they believe they are entitled to the arithmetic. Edwin's health began to change in the spring of 2016. He had a TIA, a transient ischemic attack, which is the medical name for a warning stroke, in April, while he was in the garage reorganizing the pegboard cabinet. He called it a dizzy spell. His physician, Dr. Antwig at Cleveland Clinic, called it a significant neurological event and put him on warfarin and told him he could not drive the F250 anymore. Edwin handed me the truck keys the following Sunday. Not to keep, he said for now. He said for now, the way people say for now when they mean something else. After the TIA, my parents became present in a way they had not been before. My mother began driving Edwin to his Cleveland Clinic appointments. My father began appearing at Merriman Road on Sunday mornings. The ledger table expanded. My father sat on the side that had always been empty. He did not read the ledger. He did not know how to read the ledger. But he sat at it. I noticed this. I did not say anything about it because Edwin seemed glad for the company and I was not going to take that from him by making the company a competition. In August of 2016, Edwin asked me to drive him to the offices of Holloway and Crane on East Market Street in Akron. He said he needed to update some paperwork. I parallel parked the F250 in the lot and waited in the truck for 50 minutes. While he went inside, when he came out, he walked to the driver's side window instead of the passenger door. He tapped on the glass. I rolled it down, he said. I want you to know, I have always been proud of you, Renata. I said, I know, Edwin. He said it again, exactly the same way. Then he got in the passenger seat and I drove him home. I did not go back to Holloway and Crane. I did not ask what paperwork meant. I filed the 50 minutes and the 2 repetitions somewhere in the back of my thinking and I went to work on Monday and on. The following Sunday morning I drove to Merriman Road and Edwin was at the table with the ledger and 2 cups of tea already poured, and we went through the third quarter numbers and nothing felt different and so I decided nothing was. Edwin died on a Sunday in October of 2017. He was 81. He had gone to bed on a Saturday night after watching the Browns lose to the Steelers 18-12 and he had not woken up. My mother found him at 8:40 in the morning. She called me before she called 911. I do not know why she called me first. I drove the 11 minutes and 7. I sat with him for 4 minutes before the EMTs arrived. He looked the way he always looked when he was thinking through a problem. His hands were folded on top of the quilt. His face was still. The funeral was at Second Mount Olive Baptist Church, on Copley Road. 314 people signed the guest book. The reception was at Merriman Road afterward, and my mother had arranged for catering from a restaurant called Dowit's on Exchange Street, Indra and Doro, Watt and Tibbs and Messier. Because Edwin had loved the place since it opened in 2008. People ate and talked and told the same 12 stories about Edwin that get told about good men when they are gone. I stood near the pegboard cabinet in the garage for most of the afternoon, and a woman I did not recognize touched my arm and said, "He talked about you all the time." And I said, "Thank you." Because there was nothing else to say. I did not hear from Holloway and Crane for 6 months. I was not surprised by this. Estate administration takes time and I had not expected to be contacted immediately. What I had not expected was to be contacted by a paralegal at 7:14 in the morning, with a number that was 0. Donna Schubert read me the relevant section of the revised will. The version dated August 2016, 50 minutes after I had parallel parked the F250 outside our building. My name appeared once in the document, in a line that said the share previously allocated to Renata Adwa Osei is hereby redistributed in equal portions to the remaining named beneficiaries, being Gerald Osei and Comfort Osei Mensah. I sat in my apartment on Portage Path in Akron on a Wednesday in April with the phone against my ear and I listened to Donna Schubert not speak for 11 minutes and I thought about the 2 repetitions in the truck. I want you to know I have always been proud of you. Twice. The same words, the same tempo. Edwin had been telling me something. I had filed it in the wrong place. I did not call my parents that day. I did not call them the next day. I went to work on Thursday at Hargrove Associates and I sat at my drafting table and I looked at load calculations for a pedestrian bridge in Medina County and I did the math, the way Edwin had taught me to do math, column by column, annotate the margin, go back and check. On Friday evening I drove to Merriman Road. The house was still in probate. My parents had a key, I had a key. I let myself in through the garage. The pegboard cabinet was still there, every tool still in its outline. The F250 key was on the hook by the door where I had left it. I took the key off the hook. I sat in the truck for 20 minutes in the garage, with the garage door closed and the engine off. I did not cry again. I had already cried. I was past it. I thought about what I was going to do the way Edwin would have thought about what to do. He would have made a list. He would have numbered it. He would have written in the margin. I did not have a pencil, but I had my phone, and I opened the notes application and I typed item 1. What happened? My parents went to Holloway and Crane without telling me and changed the will during a window when Edwin was medically vulnerable and frightened, and they did not tell me. Item 2. What Edwin intended, unknown. He said he was proud of me twice in the truck. That was Edwin saying goodbye to something he could not undo and was not willing to explain. Item 3. What I am entitled to, legally, nothing. The document is signed and notarized. I am not named. Contesting a will requires proof of undue influence or diminished capacity. I have 50 minutes in a parking lot and 2 repetitions. That is not proof. Item 4. What I will not do. Beg, argue, perform grief for an audience. Item 5. What I will do, leave, build, wait. Item 6. Timeline open. I put the phone in my pocket. I put the F250 key back on the hook. I walked out of the garage. I did not go back to Merriman Road for 2 years. I called my parents the following Sunday. My mother answered. She said, "Renata, how are you holding up?" I said, "Donna Schubert called me." A silence. My mother said, "We were going to tell you." I said, "When?" She did not answer that. I said, "I need you to understand that I know, and I need you to understand that I am not going to discuss it, and I need you to understand that I am going to be fine." My mother said, "Honey, it was complicated." Edwin was, I said, "I will call you next Sunday." I hung up. I called the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that, and the Sunday after that. I did not reference the will again. I did not ask what they had done with the money. I did not ask about Merriman Road. I kept the calls to 12 minutes, which was long enough to be civil and short enough to be honest about what we were. We were people who called each other on Sundays. We were not people who had breakfast together. We were not people who sat at a ledger table. My father said once, in the 3rd month, we thought it was what he wanted. I said, "Okay." He did not say anything after that. I left Hargrove Associates in January of 2019. I had been doing load calculations and site assessments for 8 years, and I was good at it, and it was not enough anymore. I had an idea I had been turning over for 3 years, a materials testing consultancy focused on infrastructure inspection for smaller municipalities that could not afford the fees the large firms charged. Akron, Canton, Massillon, Worcester, cities with bridges and drainage systems and municipal buildings that were aging and needed assessment and had no budget line for the Chicago and Cleveland rates. I named the company Baseline Structural. I incorporated in Ohio on a Thursday in February of 2019 with $47,000 in personal savings from 8 years of Hargrove paychecks and a secondhand Trimble R8 GPS unit I had bought off an engineer in Pittsburgh who was upgrading. I rented a 400 square foot office above a print shop on South Main Street in Akron for $675 a month. I put a used drafting table under the window and a secondhand Herman Miller Aeron chair behind it and a whiteboard on the wall opposite. On the whiteboard, in green dry erase marker, I wrote the first number, $47,000. Below it, I wrote a column the way Edwin would have written it. Monthly expenses, monthly required revenue, break-even timeline, margin of error. The first contract was with the city of Barberton for a bridge deck assessment on the Lake Road overpass. $14,200. I completed it in 19 days, submitted the report, and deposited the check on a Tuesday. I erased the $47,000 on the whiteboard and wrote the new number. I sat in the Aeron chair and looked at her for a while. Edwin would have said, "Good work." 2 words this time. The first year, Baseline Structural cleared $112,000 in gross revenue against $64,000 in expenses. The second year, it cleared $198,000. In the third year, I hired 2 junior engineers, Marcus Webb from University of Akron and Priya Srinivasan from Case Western, and we moved into a 1200 square foot space on Talmadge Avenue with room for a proper conference table and a dedicated server for the CAD files. I bought a new Trimble R12 LT and retired the R8. I wrote the revenue number on the whiteboard every quarter the way Edwin had written the shop numbers. Column by column, margin annotated. I went back and checked. I did not tell my parents any of this. They knew I had left Hargrove. They did not ask what I was doing. Instead, we called on Sundays, 12 minutes. The calls were fine. They were what they were. In 2021, the Ohio Department of Transportation awarded Baseline Structural a statewide inspection contract for rural bridge infrastructure in 14 counties. The contract was $2.3 million over 3 years. I hired 5 more engineers, a project manager named Layla Farouk, who had run logistics for a firm in Columbus, and a part-time bookkeeper. I moved the office again, this time to a renovated industrial building on North High Street with 12-foot ceilings and original brick and enough room for a proper materials lab. I bought good chairs for the conference room. I bought a Keurig K Elite for the kitchen and stocked it with Lavazza and a brand called Cleveland Coffee Company that roasted on the east side. Small things matter in the margins. I called my parents on a Sunday in March of 2022. My father answered, which was unusual. He usually handed the phone to my mother within the first 2 minutes. He said, "Renata, can you come to the house?" "Not Merriman Road, their house in Fairlawn," I said. "What's happened?" He said, "Nothing's happened." "We need to talk to you about something," I said. "I can come next Saturday." He said that would be good. I drove to Fairlawn on a Saturday in late March. The dogwoods on their street were just opening, white and pale pink against the gray sky. I parked the car. I was driving a 2020 Toyota Tundra, now. Not the F250, but similar enough in proportion that I always thought of the same parking lot when I parallel parked a truck and I walked up the front path. My father opened the door before I knocked. That told me something. They were both at the kitchen table when I walked in. My mother had made tea Lipton in the bag, the same brand she had been buying since I was 4, the yellow box from the Giant Eagle on West Market Street. There were 3 cups. There was no food. When there is no food on the table at an OSI family meeting, it means the conversation is going to require the whole table. My father spoke first. He said, "We've run into some difficulty." I said, "What kind?" He looked at my mother. My mother looked at her tea. He said, "The Merriman Roadhouse." I said, "What about it?" He said, "We've been carrying it. The taxes, the utilities, the upkeep. We thought we were going to sell it, but the market in that neighborhood hasn't." He stopped. I waited. My mother said, "We took a loan against it. In 2019, a home equity line through First Merit Bank, $80,000. I said, "What for?" My father said, "Some investments that didn't." My mother said, "Your father had an opportunity that didn't work out the way we expected." I picked up the Lipton tea. I held it. It was the right temperature, just past hot. My mother always made tea at the right temperature. That was a thing she was reliably good at. I thought about that for a moment. Then I said, "How much do you owe?" My father said, "Between the HELOC and the back taxes and the code violations the city cited last fall, it's close to $130,000. I set the cup down, I said, "and the estate money." My mother said, "Renata," I said, "I'm asking a factual question." My father said, "It's gone. Most of it a long time ago." I looked at the table. The wood was cherry, a dining set they had bought in 2003 from a store called Kittle's Furniture that had since closed. My mother had polished it every week for 19 years. The surface still looked new. That was also a thing she was reliably good at. I said, "What are you asking me for?" My father said, we hoped, that you might be able to help us avoid losing the house, Edwin's house." I said, "You want me to pay off the debt on a house I was removed from inheriting, with money from an estate I was removed from, and help you keep a property that was redistributed away from me?" Neither of them answered. That was its own kind of answer. I said, "I'm going to need 2 weeks." My father said, "The bank has given us 30 days. I said, 2 weeks is inside 30 days. I picked up my jacket. I stood. My mother said, "Renata, I'm sorry." She said it to the table, not to me. I said, "I know, Mom." I walked to the door. I opened it. I turned back. I said, "I need you to understand that whatever I decide, I am deciding it for Edwin. Not for the arithmetic, not for either of you. For Edwin." My father nodded. He had always been a nodder. My mother kept looking at the table. I closed the door behind me. I drove back to Akron, on the I-77. The dogwoods on their street disappeared in the rearview mirror. I drove at the speed limit the whole way. I did not play music. I was making a list. Item 1. What is actually being asked? They want $130,000 to retire the HELOC and the tax arrears and the code violations. Item 2. What is available to me? Baseline Structural has a business line of credit through Huntington Bank at $500,000. My personal savings are at $214,000 in a Vanguard index account, specifically the Vanguard Total Stock Market ETF, ticker VTI. I have no personal debt. Item 3. What the house is worth. I drove past it for a decade. I know the neighborhood. Zillow in 2022 had comparable colonials on Merriman Road at $310,000 to $340,000. The house with Edwin's improvements, and the sugar maple, and the garage with the pegboard cabinet, call it $325,000 as a conservative number. Item 4. What the legal structure would be, not a gift, not a loan to my parents, a purchase. I would buy the house from the estate executor, which was my father, at F. Fair market value minus the outstanding debt. I would own it. They would be clear. Item 5. What I would do with it, nothing for now. I would rent it at below market to a family who needed the space. I would maintain the pegboard cabinet exactly as Edwin left it. I would decide the rest later. Item 6. What I was not going to do. Negotiate. Apologize for having the money. Perform generosity. I called Sarah Omalulu on a Monday morning. Sarah was an attorney I had used for the ODOT contract, real estate adjacent, methodical, no excess language. I told her what I needed. She said, "You want to buy your grandfather's house from your father as estate executor at a price that clears the debt and requires no cash outlay from your parents." I said, "Correct." She said, "And you want your name on the deed as sole owner." I said, "Correct." She said, "And you want this done in 14 days?" I said, 11. She said, "I'll need the death certificate, the probate close documents, the HELOC statements, the tax arrears notice, and the code violation order." I had all of them in a folder in my filing cabinet, labeled Merriman Road. I had been keeping that folder since 2018. I did not know I would need it. I kept it because Edwin had taught me to keep the documentation. Sarah called me on day 9. She said, "The number is $127,400 to clear everything." Fair market appraisal came in at $318,000. I said, "So I pay $318,000. $127,400 goes to the bank and the city and the contractor for the code violations, and my parents receive the net?" She said, "Correct. Net to them is approximately $190,600. I said, "Wire instructions." She sent them by end of day. I wired the money from my Huntington business line on a Thursday. I transferred from VTI to cover it by end of the following Monday. The deed was filed with Summit County on a Friday. Sarah sent me a scan of it. My name on it, alone, in the typed block where the owner's name goes, Renata Edwoa Ose. I looked at it for a moment. I printed it on the printer in the baseline structural office. I put it in the Merriman Road folder. I put the folder back in the filing cabinet. I called my parents on Sunday. My father answered again. I said, "The deed is filed. Sarah will send you the closing documents this week. The net proceeds will wire to you by Wednesday." He said, "Renata?" I said, "Edwin would have done the math the same way." He said, "I know." I said, 12 minutes was up. "I'll call you next Sunday." I hung up. I drove to Merriman Road on a Saturday in April. The sugar maple in the backyard had leafed out pale green in the April light, the way it did every spring, without being asked. I let myself in through the garage. The pegboard cabinet was still there, every tool in its orange outline, the number 2 pencils and the cup by the door, the Sunday ledger still on the kitchen table, Edwin's handwriting in the quarterly margins. I stood in the kitchen for 15 minutes without moving. Then I went through every room, the way you go through rooms when you are making an accounting, noting what needed repair, what was original, what could be kept exactly as it was. The water heater was a 2009 Rheem from Home Depot. It needed replacement. I called a plumber named Dexter from a company called All American Plumbing on Waterloo Road, and he came the following Tuesday and installed a new Rheem 40-gallon natural gas unit with a 6-year warranty. $1,140 installed. I wrote it in the margin of a yellow legal pad, the way Edwin wrote things. The family who moved in that August was named the Acostas, Jorge and Miriam, and their 3 daughters, ages 9, 12, and 14. Jorge was an ironworker. Miriam was a dental hygienist at a practice on South Arlington. They had been renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Kenmore for 4 years, and the eldest daughter, whose name was Carmen, and who was 14 and wanted to be an architect, had been sharing a room with her two sisters since she was 8. I charged them $100 a month, which as $400 below the Merriman Road comparable market rate. I told them the pegboard cabinet in the garage was not to be disturbed. Jorge Acosta looked at it for a long time the first time he saw it, and he said, "This man knew how to keep a shop." I said, yes, that was all I needed to say. Carmen Acosta came to the Baseline Structural office on a Saturday in October of 2022 with a folder of hand-drawn building elevations she had done in pencil on graph paper. She had taken the bus from Merriman Road to South Main Street. She knocked on the office door at 10:15 in the morning. I was there because I was usually there on Saturdays. She said, "I heard you're a structural engineer." I said, "Come in." She spread the drawings on the conference table. They were good, not technically precise, but spatially intuitive in the way that real architectural sensibility is before training gives it language. I said, "These are good, Carmen." She said, "I know, Edwin would have liked her. I have told you about the money and the house and the deed and the Acostas. I have not yet told you about the Sunday call in January of 2023 that was different from the other Sunday calls." My father answered. He said, "I want to tell you something and I don't want you to say anything until I'm finished." I said, "Okay." He said, "Your mother and I have argued about this since the day we left Holloway and Crane. She wanted to tell you before Edwin was gone. I told her it was Edwin's decision and we had to respect it. That was not true. It was our decision. Edwin was frightened after the TIA, and I was in that room at Holloway and Crane, and I told the attorney that the split should be simplified. Edwin did not fight me on it. He was tired. He trusted me. I used his trust the wrong way. I need you to know that. I know that. Your mother has known it since the truck." I held the phone. My father breathed. I said, "What do you mean since the truck?" He said, "She heard him from the kitchen. When he said he was proud of you twice. In the garage when you were getting the keys. She was standing at the kitchen window. She heard him say it twice and she knew what it meant, and she has never forgiven either of us for it." I said, "I know you told me to wait, but I need to ask you one thing." He said, "Okay." I said, "Did Edwin know what he was signing when he signed it?" A pause. My father said, "I believe he did. I believe he signed it the way he signed everything, knowing exactly what it said and deciding that my presence in the room meant he owed me something. He was always paying what he thought he owed." I said, "Yes, he was." My father said, "I'm sorry, Renata." I said, "I know, Dad. The 12 minutes was already past. I let it run. I went to Merriman Road in March. Not to check the property, to sit at the kitchen table. Miriam Acosta made coffee in a stovetop Bialetti mocha pot, the 3-cup size, the kind that produces a short, strong brew that you have to drink immediately before it goes bitter. She set 2 cups on the table and left us to it. I sat in Edwin's chair. The ledger was in the kitchen drawer where I had left it. I put it on the table. I opened it to the last page Edwin had written. Third quarter, 2017. The numbers in the column, the annotations in the margin, the number 2, pencil marks that were softer now from being handled. I read the last annotation. It said, "Check the margin twice. The number holds." I looked at that for a long time. Then I closed the ledger and finished the mocha pot coffee and washed both cups in the sink, the way Edwin washed things. Thorough, no excess motion. And put them back in the cabinet above the coffee maker and let myself out through the garage. Carmen Acosta's graph paper elevations were taped to the wall above the work table in the garage. She had been using the space on Saturdays to draw. I had told her she could. The drawings were more technically precise now. She had been watching YouTube tutorials on architectural drafting. The spatial intuition was LL there. The language was beginning to arrive. I drove back to the Baseline Structural office. I sat in the Aeron chair. I opened my laptop. I composed an email to Sarah Omalulu. I told her I wanted to establish a trust. The corpus would be $180,000 from my personal savings, again from the Vanguard Total Stock Market ETF, VTI. The purpose of the trust was to fund post-secondary education or vocational training for any child or young adult who had lived as a tenant in the property at the Merriman Road address in Akron, Ohio, for a minimum of 12 consecutive months. The beneficiary did not have to be from the Osai family. The trust would be named the Edwin Osai Education Trust. The first eligible beneficiary was Carmen Acosta. age 14, who would be eligible at age 17 if she remained a resident. Sarah replied in 40 minutes. She said, "You want me to draft this as an irrevocable trust, with residential tenure as the qualifying condition?" I said, "Correct." She said, "You understand that future tenants would also qualify?" I said, "That's the point." She filed the trust instrument in Summit County on a Thursday. The corpus was funded the following Monday. I did not tell my parents about the trust. I did not tell the Acostas about it either. I told Carmen. On the Saturday she came in with elevations that had dimensions on them for the first time, proper dimension elevations with scale bars and section markers, done by hand on 24 by 36-inch drafting paper she had bought at a Dick Blick art materials store on West Exchange Street. I told her the way I would have told her about any structural element, clearly without decoration. There is a trust in your name. It covers 4 years of undergraduate tuition and room and board at any accredited architecture program in the United States. You are eligible in 3 years if you are still at Merriman Road. She looked at me for a moment. She said, "Did my parents know?" I said, "Not yet." She said, "How much?" I said the number. She looked at the dimensioned elevations on the table for a moment. Then she looked back at me. She said, "I'm going to be good at this." I said, "I know." Edwin would have said the same 2 words. There are things I understand now about my parents that I did not understand in 2018 when Donna Schubert stayed on the line for 11 minutes. I understand that comfortable people make the arithmetic wrong when they are frightened about comfort going away. I understand that my father was in a room with a frightened man who trusted him and used that trust the way people use the tools available when they are afraid. I understand that my mother heard 2 repetitions from a kitchen window and has been standing at that window ever since. I understand that Edwin signed a document that removed my name because he was tired and his son was in the room and he paid what he thought he owed. What I do not understand, and have stopped trying to understand, is why none of them told me. The removing, I can trace the logic of the silence, I cannot. That is where my understanding ends, and the thing that is not forgiveness but lives beside it begins. My grandfather drove himself to Columbus in a 30-year-old truck to watch me cross the stage. He shook my hand with a full grip, 2 pumps, held 1 extra second. He said 3 words. He told me twice that he was proud of me, in a parking lot, in October, when I did not know what he was saying. He left me a pegboard cabinet with every orange outline still full. He left me a ledger with the last annotation in the margin. He left me Carmen Acosta drawing elevations on a Saturday with scale bars. For the first time, he left me the sugar maple. He left me more than arithmetic can measure. The Edwin OSI Education Trust is funded. The Merriman Road house has a family in it who needed the space. The pegboard cabinet has all its tools in all their outlines, on the kitchen table, in the drawer. The ledger is still there. The last annotation in the